Hello, and welcome to episode 57 of Gondor Calls for Ale, a Middle-earth strategy battle games podcast. I am, of course, your host, Sam Gallagher, and with me, as always, is my brother Ben.
Hello, listeners and viewers. Welcome back to the show.
Yeah, it's obviously only been 2 weeks for you if you're listening or viewing, but it feels like it's been a lot longer than that since we've actually recorded an episode, which is kind of the nature of how it goes with two-part episodes and the 2 week gap. So, anyway, so forgive us, or forgive me at the very least, if this is a little bit rusty. And we're going to start by knocking the rust off, Ben, with a little bit of alcohol of some sort.
Oh, you know it.
Not quite sure where we were going with that, but Ben, where we're going now is you telling us what you're drinking this fine evening. So, what is it?
Well, for this episode, Sam, I have myself a White City Pale Ale. Do you think the do you think the eyes of the White Tower are blind drunk? Because they will be if they have a few more of these.
Well, it sounds like they might already have been with that very smooth delivery.
Yeah. Classic Ben Gallagher bumbling his beer lines. Well, Sam, can you give us a smoother delivery for your drink? What are you sipping on this delightful evening?
Well, Ben, I make no promises about a smoother delivery, but I am having a Rohan Royal Night Ale. Not to be confused with a Royal Guard Ale, Ben, because this is for strictly those who are mounted.
Delicious. It does crack me up that Games Workshop sells them on the store as Royal Knights.
Yeah. Well, and there's
on the web store.
And what's his name is the chief of the King's Knights, but
yeah, I mean Tolkien refers to them as Theoden's Knights, so it makes sense. There's no profile for Rohan Knights in the Middle Earth rulebook.
It absolutely is. It's as soon as you put a Royal Guard on a horse, he becomes a knight.
That's indeed.
Anyway, enough debating the philosophies of naming and what makes a knight or doesn't make a knight, Ben. I think we should probably prepare our listeners and our viewers for what we're talking about, which is, of course, your attendance of you said it was the Philly SBG Special 3. Quite the mouthful.
That's correct.
Rolls off the tongue, which was a 1,000 point event. Oh boy, are these popping up all over the place now as everyone prepares for the Nova Open. So 1,000 point single day event, 3 games, played at Palladium Games somewhere in the great state of Pennsylvania.
Phoenixville, Pennsylvania.
Yes. Less crucial to know where it is exactly because it's long past at this point. But you went solo. I did not make this one. 1,000 points, not overly my jam, and I think I was busy anyway. So yeah, we're going to hear all about it. Do you want to go through? Do you want to start us off with your army list?
I sure do, Sam. So yeah, like you said, 1,000 points, and I decided that what I wanted to do for 1,000 points was bring Gandalf the White back out of the box. I struggled with him at 800 points, but maybe 1,000 points is his magic number. So I have myself a list that gets 0 points for theme, I think. But that's okay. I'm excited to put it on the table. So for my army leader, I have none other than Denethor, Steward of Gondor, with in his warband there are 6 warriors of Minas Tirith with shield, 3 warriors of Minas Tirith with spear, 1 warrior of Minas Tirith with shield and banner, and 5 rangers of Gondor with spear. Next we have Gandalf the White on Shadowfax with 7 warriors of Minas Tirith with shield, 2 warriors of Minas Tirith with spear and shield, and 5 rangers of Gondor with spear. And the final Minas Tirith contingent, we have Madril, Captain of Ithilien, with 5 warriors of Minas Tirith with shield, 3 warriors of Minas Tirith with spear and shield, and 4 rangers of Gondor with spear. And then my allied contingent from Rohan, we started off with Theodred, heir of Rohan, on horse with a shield. Next we have Eomer, 3rd Marshal of the Riddermark, with shield, throwing spears, and horse. And finally we have Dernhelm with throwing spears. So we've got a total of 48 models, 15 bows including Madril, and 15 might.
Yeah, interesting. It seems like somebody's been observing or playing against or at events with too many Gwaihir plus Galadriel plus X other thing. But oh well, what can you do?
This is my good soup for sure.
So,
Not too soupy though. It's at least a green alliance. So keeping my Rohan army bonus
yeah.
there.
Sure. I mean, yes, you are accurate. It is a Green Alliance, but one of those characters didn't exist at the time of another. So
Yeah.
anyway, it doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
and Madril was dead by the time the Battle of Pelennor Fields rolled around as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a list that I feel that Gandalf is very points inefficient, so I tried to take heroes who are either very points efficient or fill a role that the list didn't have. So the Rohan is there to be the mailed fist to add some punch to the list, and Minas Tirith is there to try and get as many bodies in as possible. And you can see from the weird numbers of like 7 warriors in a warband and then a handful that don't have, there's a lot of sword and board warriors in Minas Tirith and not that many spear guys. All the rangers have spears, so it kind of balances out. But I was hurting for points trying to get what I wanted in here.
Are you, all your is Madril and Denethor, are their warbands full?
All the warbands are full, except obviously the Rohan have 0 warbands, but all the Minas Tirith. I think Gandalf's is actually short 1 warrior. One of them's not quite full. I could have crammed 49 models in there, but it doesn't change your break. It doesn't change the quarter.
Yeah, I was just thinking your concern of Gandalf being points inefficient, like you could take. I don't know. I was going to say you could make it a Yellow Alliance and take Saruman from the White Council, and but then you'd have to take Rohan dudes because Saruman obviously doesn't do troops. Anyway, you'd have this army with what Gandalf's 240, 220?
240 points on
So
Shadowfax.
you'd get 60 additional points. So you honestly could take Saruman, a cheapo captain, or another cheap Minas Tirith hero, and change nothing else.
Yeah, or just like add 60 points, so you can put in 7 warriors of Rohan, maybe 6 with throwing spears and shields.
Yeah, but Gandalf is leading troops.
Right. So we lose.
You
Yeah.
suddenly are down all of his. Anyway. I just so yeah, I think that's. I'll be interested to hear how it goes. I don't, as you pointed out, I don't love the theme, so I'm gonna state that it doesn't have a theme, and that really bums me out, man. But I will try not to belabor that point or bring it up too often.
Yeah.
But I did want to make sure that that was clearly stated. Yeah, I think it's about time we hear how the army does, and we move into some battle reports. But Ben, before we roll into that, we're going to roll into something else. See what I did there? And that is, of course, a message from our sponsor. That's right, the Baron of Dice continues to sponsor Gondor Calls for Ale. And Ben, we are ever so pleased to be sponsored by the Baron of Dice, a maker of premium wargaming dice, Ben. Beautiful hand-swirled resin dice. You've got all manner of shapes and sizes. Mostly the thing that I'm always the most excited about is those beautiful square-cornered dice. And, of course, it wouldn't be a Middle-earth podcast without mentioning that there is a range of dice specifically for Middle-earth. So your unthemed army can have themed dice, which, as a Gondor Calls for Ale guarantee, are guaranteed to roll 6s at least some of the time. So, Ben, if you are intrigued by this, if you want to get some of these beautiful dice, you can go to the link in the description of wherever you're watching or listening to this podcast. And if you place an order and use our promo code, capital G, capital C, capital A, you can get a sweet discount on that order. It helps us out, it helps him out. So definitely worth checking it out. And now we're going to move on back to hear about how Ben's army performed at 1,000 points, the first 1,000-point event ever to be talked about in the show. But it won't be the last, that's for damn sure.
No, it will not. More of this in the future. So for round 1, I was playing against Paul, who had Boromir, Imrahil, Forlong, and Durnhir. Boromir, captain of the White Tower, I should say. So, they were helping Boromir bail out Minas Tirith, I suppose, before he rode off to help the Fellowship. Which is an interesting list because you can get some of your warriors up to fight 6 between Boromir's banner and Imrahil's fight buff. I believe he had about the same number of models as me. We might even have had exactly the same model count. He had a handful of Knights of Minas Tirith, handful of rangers with Durinhir, and a handful of mounted Swan Knights, and then a number of Swan Knights on foot, warriors of Minas Tirith on foot, and a bunch of pikemen. And we were playing Destroy the Supplies.
Excellent, Ben. I will give a read through. But before I do, I think it's worth mentioning, I believe this was a veto system tournament.
Yes.
Which makes sense because that's what Nova's going to be. So, Destroy the Supplies. If you are viewing on the interwebs, you can see the beautiful deployment map. If you're listening to it, it is 12-inch up deployment zones. And across each of your deployment zones, you have 3 objectives evenly spaced. You have a game that lasts until one force is being reduced to 25% of its starting number. We have some special rules which become relevant very quickly, so we're going to read them first. We have the supply markers. The objective markers represent a series of supply markers that both sides are trying to destroy. To destroy an enemy supply marker, a model must be in base contact with the marker at the end phase of a turn, having not cast any magic powers, used a missile weapon, been involved in a fight, or been under the effects of paralyze, immobilize, or transfix magical powers during that turn. Once the supply marker has been destroyed, remove it from play. Okay, that all checks out. We've got some scoring. You score 2 victory points for each enemy supply marker that has been destroyed. You score 1 victory point for causing 1 or more wounds to the enemy leader. If you kill the enemy leader instead, you score 2. You score 1 victory point if the enemy force is broken at the end of the game. If the enemy force is broken at the end of the game and your force is unbroken, instead you score 2. You score 1 victory point for having at least 1 banner. If you have at least 1 banner and your opponent has none, instead you score 2. There we have it.
Yes, indeed. All right, so we are going to get right on into it, Sam. We were playing on sort of another generic fantasy board. We've got a couple of buildings. We've got a big wood in the middle of the board and a wood in one of the deployment zones. And this is going to be an interesting game to sort of summarize, because there was sort of three flanks that ended up happening, or a center and 2 flanks. That were like very separate from each other for the game. We've both got 15 might, which is a lot on the table, and you can really have this interesting thing happen where you're calling moves over here and over here in parts of the board that are completely separate from each other, which I thought was sort of an interesting thing that happens when the games get this big. So over the first couple of turns, we're just sort of maneuvering for position. I've got my force relatively spread out. I've got some rangers on the objective that's just at the very left-hand edge of this image, and Denethor and Madril are holding my rightmost objective, with Gandalf's warband and the bulk of my warriors of Minas Tirith sort of up around these woods, with my Rohan heroes not quite sure where they were going yet. They were just sort of loitering in the backfield. And over the first 2 turns, I managed to get 4 shooting kills and take 1 shooting kill in return. And we get this interesting thing that happens where Paul has to call a move with Imrahil in order to not get Sorceress blasted by Gandalf, which was, I had Gandalf in a position, right? Imrahil's behind his battle lines like you do when you're facing bows. And then Paul realized that, oh no, Gandalf's like right there. I've taken priority on turn 2. So Imrahil basically burns a point of might. And I was totally happy to let him call a move. Imrahil moves and basically just sort of pushes his warband up. I was like, that's fine. Take some more shooting casualties. And then we get into turn 3, which is where all the game really begins. So Imrahil's warband's coming down between this forest and this building. Boromir's warband is still in the back. He's with Forlong, and he's ultimately going to go around the other side of the wood. I should have given him a couple more turns to really get on the other side of that forest before I ended up engaging. I ended up engaging this turn, because basically Paul ran forwards one of his Swan Knights up close to my battle lines. He was a good 12 inches away from all of my Rohan heroes. But I've got Gandalf, so I decided to command that knight forwards and then charge Gandalf into him, charge Éomer into him, charge all of my commanded heroes. They all charge into this one knight, and basically what I'm threatening to do is just go kill Imrahil, because Imrahil is not behind his battle line anymore because he doesn't want to eat another Sorcerer's Blast. And now I've pulled this knight out, and I'm just going to strike up with my heroes and go charging into Imrahil. In the shooting phase, he's been sending some Swan Knights around that left-hand flank. I managed to shoot 2 of the Swan Knights one of them off their horses and just straight up killed one of them, which was the tail for these rangers. I'm going to forget to talk about this left-hand flank because it was just like 5 rangers over there taking shots at a handful of knights that were going to go burn my supplies. And my rangers absolutely just over the course of the game just were worth their weight in gold, just taking the knights down, taking them off their horses. So in the combat phase, I call a strike and a heroic combat. I think I burned Merry's Might and Theodred strikes. I also struck with Eomer because even if Imrahil strikes up or calls a defense or something, I want to be higher fight than the fight 5 pikemen that I'm going to go charging into. So Imrahil calls a heroic defense, and I decided that's great. I'm going to charge Theodred into him anyway. Gandalf and Eomer are going to go charge in, and Dernhelm are just going to go charge into and mop up some pikemen, which goes great right up until we get to Gandalf's combat. Gandalf loses his fight. He's got 3 dice. He's fighting like 2 pikemen, loses the fight against the pikemen, and Shadowfax gets piked to death this turn, which was unfortunate. Theodred, in trade-off, manages to kill Imrahil's horse and take a point of fate off of Imrahil. And Dernhelm and Eomer, between the 2 of them, get 5 kills. 4 more kills. We got the 5th kill was, of course, killing that knight. So Paul takes turn 4 priority, and we get stuck into it. And this is where I should have given Boromir more time to like move around those woods, because Forlong keeps leading that flanking force round towards Madril and Denethor, who are holding my supplies. But Boromir comes running back to bail out Imrahil.
Do we have any more pictures of this, or are we just on what pictures?
Yes. Sorry, I get distracted. So that's like there's the knight that I springboard off of, and then the next. You can see I just went charging in with my cavalry there, and then Boromir comes running back. Forlong's warband pushes up, and over the next couple of turns, where I just like slam into Imrahil, I think so Paul gets turn 4 priority. I win the move off. We go back into Imrahil. We do another couple of wounds to him. Theodred is an absolute beast. He was great just throwing him into Imrahil. And Dernhelm had a really great turn where she charged into 2 foot knights, and Paul countercharged her with like, I think 2 more knights and then backed them up with a bunch of pikes. So she's up against something like 10 dice, and I strike because they're fight 6 with Boromir over there now, and she obliterated all 4 of the models that she was in combat with. Yeah. And it just went from, she's all the way in the back near the supplies there, and it went from like her trying to fight through a big horde of guys, just all of a sudden in one turn it was just her back there. But basically what happens in the center is I get stonewalled. This game ends on time, and Gandalf, Eomer, and Theodred do a great job grinding through Imrahil. We burn out all of his stats. At the end of the game, Imrahil is just on 1 wound, no might, no fate. He's off his horse. Boromir was a beast. Ultimately, Boromir kills Theodred, which was rough, but that's fine. I don't have any, he's 95 points. He's not worth any victory points for me. And Dernhelm and Merry are 1 turn away at the end of the game from burning my supply. I do break Paul before the game ends. But importantly, on the other flank, Madril's warband is dealing with Forlong. So they're coming around these woods. And basically, I wasn't able to protect my supplies. I lost one of them. I lost a move off. Or I won the move off and moved first by Imrahil so that Forlong got to move. It was one of those, like, you can't win both move offs. Mm-hmm. And I needed to win both move offs. So I decided to win the move off by Imrahil, which means that Forlong's warband got a better engage on me. And I think Forlong ended up calling a heroic combat, pushing forwards, and then dropping one of his, there was one of those Minas Tirith knights on that flank. And he moved him on top of the supply marker. And then in the next turn, that knight just sat there and burned my supply. And this one ended up as a 3-all tie. So I had broken him without being broken, and we both had a banner.
Gotcha.
Yeah. It was a great game. I realize if anyone's looking at this, that technically Imrahil should be the army leader because he's a hero of legend. Paul had his list with Boromir as the army leader, and I got lost in the parking lot. My GPS took me to some part in the parking lot that was not near the store, and I was like wandering like an idiot trying to find the game store and was late. And I just was like, okay, that's fine. I'm not gonna argue over who needs to be your army leader. This is sort of a test game for Nova and practicing 1,000 points, and I'm not too stressed about it. So I think technically with it as Imrahil as the leader, I would have won 4-3. But like I said, it was a really fantastic game, and Paul was a very understanding opponent because I came into this one a bit frazzled and kept forgetting my rules and stuff. So it was a really fantastic game. And I think had it gone on another turn, if you look at his backfield, there's Dernhelm back there. She's 4 inches away from a supply marker. So next turn, she would have dropped off Merry, burned that supply, and then gone on to the next supply.
Yeah.
And just, it was pretty much my game at this point. So I feel very, very happy with how it went, really.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
I guess I didn't take Imrahil off his horse. Look, he's on his horse all game. Oh, I took Boromir off his horse. I just wrote it on the wrong line. But yeah, a great game, thoroughly enjoyable. But we move on, Sam, after getting a tie, the only people to get ties, which I think actually went to my favor for a 3-day tournament.
3 game.
We move on to my second game, which was against Logan, who had 2 of my favorite characters ever, Sam. He had Azog and Bolg with Thimble, Narzug, and Yazneg, which I think is maybe where he went wrong because he just had Hunter Orcs. Azog was a solo drop from the army from the Azog's Legion, and his total model count was again the same as mine at 48. So I don't really think this list has quite enough bodies to back up what it needs to do. As good as I love Hunter Orcs, I would have dropped Thimble or Yazneg or not, one of them, and just add that many more Hunter Orcs. And we were playing Divide and Conquer.
All right, Divide and Conquer, scenario 17. Again, if you're viewing, you can see the beautiful deployment map. If you're listening, you get a 12-inch bubble off one table quarter, or table corner, and then the opposite table corner, you get another 12-inch bubble, and you have to alternate deploying warbands. So if you deploy one in your deployment zone A, the next one has to go in B, back and forth, back and forth. All right. And there are 3 objective markers across the center of the board, 1 in the middle and then 2 on either side. We've got a game that may end after a turn in which one force has been broken, so on a 1 or a 2 it will end, otherwise it will continue going. We've got some victory points here. You score 3 victory points if there are more friendly than enemy models within 3 inches of the center objective. If there's at least 1 friendly model and no enemy models within 3, instead you score 5. For each of the other objectives, you score 1 victory point if there are more friendly than enemy models within 3 inches of the objective. If there's at least 1 friendly model and no enemy models within 3 of that objective, instead you score 2. You score 1 victory point for causing 1 or more wounds to the enemy leader. If you kill the enemy leader, instead you score 2. You score 1 victory point if the enemy force is broken at the end of the game. An interesting scenario, not my favorite one that I believe you enjoy. But, Ben, I'm going to use this moment to talk a little bit more, and that is, of course, to plug our Patreon. If you want to truly know how Ben and Sam feel about all of the scenarios, you can listen to us go on at length about them in our Half Pint episodes, which are available on our Patreon. The link for that is in the description of wherever you're listening to this episode. That's really what helps us out. If you feel like checking it out and giving us a couple bucks a month, that would be fantastic, but no pressure. We'll only like you a little bit less if you don't.
And to those of you who have already subscribed to our Patreon and are supporting us, you of course have our undying gratitude and unending thanks. Cheers! Hail the victorious Patreons.
Cheers indeed. Cheers indeed. It is also currently the only place you can get some beautiful custom Baron of Dice Gondor Calls for Ale dice. So if those pique your fancy, you too can have them.
All right, Sam. So Divide and Conquer. At first, I think I lost the veto roll-off, and Logan chose this one. And at first, I was like, I don't know. Like, my army's so weird. It's got like this big infantry force and these 2 cavalry heroes, and I've only got 1 march. And then I realized that what I need to do is, and you can't leave Denethor on his own. Denethor has to have someone with might with him because he's your army leader and he's worth victory points. And anyway, so I decided in the end what I was going to do was deploy the 3 Rohan heroes on their own, and they were just going to have to weather the hail of Hunter Orc arrows coming their way, and Gandalf was going to be in his, all the Minas Tirith forces were going to be in another table corner. And we get right on into it. I take first turn priority and decide to channel Blinding Light, which was a complete waste of might. Did not need to have channeled it. I could have just cast it. I also probably could have just eaten the shooting. I believe Logan had... Oh, God, it was quite... Because Hunter Orcs, I think it was like 18 bows, but they were split up in the 2 deployment zones. And if you're looking at the pictures, you can see we're on this Khazad-dûm board. And there was a big dwarf brewery just in front of one of my main deployment zones. So I was essentially able to move my Minas Tirith force in such a way that only half of his army could shoot me. So I definitely could have gotten away with just casting Blinding Light, or even just not. Either way, I also call a march with Madril because as I am a shooting army, I've paid for 14 rangers with bows and Madril. But in this particular scenario, I really don't want to get stuck in the wrong position. So I decided to call a march with Madril and try and get to some of the objectives before the Hunter Orcs did. So basically, we rush up forwards, and my 3 Rohan heroes ride forth with Eomer out front, because he's got 3 Fate and Horse Lord, and then we've got Eowyn behind him and Theodred bringing up the rear, so that in theory, Theodred, the one with only 1 Fate and Horse Lord, is the hardest to shoot off his horse. The most number of in-the-ways. As it turns out, I didn't take any shooting casualties. I think they were shooting at the Hunter Orcs were shooting at the Rohan heroes, but they also moved. Nothing happens. On turn 2, though, I get to do some shooting. I leave a contingent of Rangers still, and we unload into some Hunter Orcs coming forward, so we manage to kill 3 Hunter Orcs. And then we get into turn 3, the first important turn of the game, where Logan takes priority, which is great for me because I really want to see how he's reacting. And basically, my hope here was that I could do enough damage to one chunk of the Hunter Orcs, while Azog, Bolg, and I think it was Yazneg. So you've got Thimble and Narzug in one deployment zone, Azog, Bolg, and Yazneg in the other one, and they're rushing ahead of their lines. And again, I think Azog and Bolg both have March. He's got 15... No, he's got more might than that. He's got 9... He's got 18 might in this army, so he could have been calling marches with Azog just to get the Hunter Orcs up faster. But he didn't. And as you can see, if you look at this picture, the first picture I bothered to take on turn 3, Azog and Bolg and Yazneg are ahead, quite a bit ahead of their contingent of Hunter Orcs, and they're hiding behind this building, getting ready to do some fell sight shenanigans. But my Rohan heroes have made contact with Yazneg and Fimbul's warband. They charge on in, and Eomer and Eowyn both call heroic combats this turn. Eowyn has to spend some might to win that, but that's okay. We just plow into their warbands and do some damage. Fimbul has to call a strike because I don't know why he called a strike. I don't know that I was in combat with him, but I think like from my heroic combat coming his way, he decided to strike up to sort of ward my heroes away from Fimbul for another turn. So we get into turn 4 where Logan once again takes priority. And I apparently didn't call a move. That seems like madness. I must have called a move somewhere. I've got Theodred marked down for -1 might, so maybe he called a move. I'm not sure who it went to, but I needed to keep the pressure on. But we get into Gandalf's first moment of glory, where he manages to, after Azog has moved up, Gandalf goes. He's not in range of the heroic move, or maybe I didn't call a heroic move. Maybe I was willing to bait Azog in, and I get to Sorceress Blast a Hunter Orc into Azog, take him off the White Warg, and they are both knocked prone for this turn. So there's one of them that we don't have to worry about. Bolg was not able to get into combat, but I decided to do something pretty risky here. I decided to call another heroic combat with Dernhelm and charge into Bolg on her own, not striking up. Because, Sam, I had faith in Bolg's ability to flub. I love him, he's great, but there's just something about him. People tend to roll terribly with Bolg. They can do, and I just had that feeling that Bolg wasn't going to get the 6 and that Eowyn was. And lo and behold, Eowyn manages to charge into Bolg, wins the fight, and kills Bolg's Warg, which was fantastic. So I take the next turn priority, and Azog calls a move. Madril counter moves, and the move goes to me. And at this point, like, that move off was Logan's chance to get back in the driving seat of this game, and it didn't go his way. Move off went to me, and I managed to transfix Azog, I think, this turn. Yeah, managed to transfix Azog, pile a bunch of guys into the White Warg. My Rohan heroes go, Eomer and Theodred go back into Bolg, and they both strike off. Bolg strikes up in the combat phase. Bolg rolls a 3 high, isn't able to win the fight against Theodred and Eomer, and is killed this turn, which really means that he's in trouble too, because Gandalf goes into Narzug this turn and kills Narzug as well, and where our spear walls are locking, I'm winning all the fights. He's fight 3, but I just had that. You've got the high fight, and you just have one of those turns where you just roll 6s, and Hunter Orcs. One of the things I was worried about with my army list is that I was going to run into a lot of defense 6, and I would struggle to grind through that. First game, a lot of defense 5 with the fiefdoms guys. Second game, Hunter Orcs, also low defense. So killing them on 5s, winning the fights. I managed to kill, I think, 7 of them this turn and lost like 3 in response. And Azog still hasn't managed to do anything. Bolg is now dead, and most of the Hunter Orc captains are also out of the picture. And Logan takes the next turn priority, gets a good setup. He gets Narzug in a good place, gets Azog in a good place, but unfortunately for him, I was able to Sorcerous Blast Yazneg into Azog and actually killed Yazneg with the Sorcerous Blast. He took a wound from the blast, a wound from hitting Azog. Azog's knocked over again, so again, Azog's not doing anything. Dernhelm is now in a position to ride around. So we've basically been fighting over the center objective and the right-hand objective over these couple of turns. Dernhelm has, because Bolg is dead and he was what was holding that flank, really, Dernhelm's now able to ride around the board and kill the 3 Hunter Orcs that are holding the other objective, and then she drops off Mary and comes riding back around. And I won this one 8-0. It was a fun game. I definitely had like home field advantage, just being so familiar with Azog's hunters and Bolg and Azog. And like I said a couple of times, I think he should have called a march, and I think he should have had more bodies in this list. But yeah, a fun game. Nice to have my list like this. Like the first game, I was not playing very well. I was figuring out my list a little bit, and this game, it did what I wanted it to do. My battle line ground out against Hunter Orcs, and my Rohan heroes and Gandalf got to tag team together and just kill big heroes, which was great.
Excellent. So, proof of concept coming together a little bit then.
Yes, indeed. So now I am 1 tie and 1 major victory, which takes us into the 3rd round, and I am fighting on table 2.
Ooh.
Fighting on table 2. There were no other ties, like I said, so my tie sort of put me as one of 4 undefeated players at this point.
Very nice.
And I was playing Josh, who brought Angmar. And I was so excited for this game. You don't, like, my opponent's playing Angmar, I'm really excited. You don't normally think that, but Gandalf the White is such a hard shutdown for Angmar. It's just fantastic. And he had an interesting Angmar list. I'll boo hiss Angmar players, whatever you like. But his list was the Witch King with 3 might, 15 will, and 3 fate. The Tainted, who's 2-14-2. The Dwimmerlake, who's 0-16-2. Burder, a Shade, and 1 Barrow White. And I believe he had about 56 to 60 models, somewhere in that range.
Gotcha.
And we were playing to the death.
All right. To the death. Scenario 2. Very straightforward. 12-inch up deployment zones. You've got a game that lasts until a turn in which one player has been reduced to 25% of its starting number. You've got some victory points. You score 1 victory point for causing 1 or more wounds to the enemy leader. If you kill the enemy leader instead, you score 3. You score 3 victory points if the enemy force is broken at the end of the game. If the enemy force is broken and your force is unbroken, instead you score 5. You score 1 victory point for having at least 1 banner. If you have one banner and your opponent has none, instead you score 2, you score 2 victory points if the enemy force has been reduced to 25% of its starting number. There we go. Pretty simple and straightforward.
Yeah. All right. So we were playing on a nice woodland board. We got some woods, and we've got a river running down the middle of the board with 3 fords or bridges or whatever, shallow water points, or like open ground points, and we called the rest of the stream shallow water, which again was fantastic for me because we're playing to the death. I've got 0 incentive to run at him. He's got no bows. He's got to run at me. So I just sat there and shot him for the first 3 turns of the game, which was also really key because, as I mentioned, Gandalf the White can be a really hard shutdown if you run into a lot of magic, because he's got access to Fortify Spirit. He can cast Fortify Spirit on your own heroes, which gives them 2 dice to resist any spell cast at them, which is huge. So over the first 3 turns of the game, I put Fortify Spirit on Theodred, I put Fortify Spirit on Éomer. Durnhelm already comes with resistant to magic because Merry has resistant to magic. So I decided to put another Fortify Spirit on Gandalf himself because the Witch King's sitting out there with your staff is broken, and it's just not... to me, it just wasn't worth risking. And each one of those, when I played the Riders of Éomer many months ago, I did something similar, ran into the Witch King, was putting Fortify Spirits on my big heroes, and I was doing it with the free dice, because you get it on a 3 or better, but I failed one of them, and I needed it to have gone off, because I needed then Gandalf to go do other things. He couldn't just be sitting there buffing my guys. So for each one of these, I was like, these need to go off. I'm only going to have so many turns before I need to be doing offensive magic, so I spent a point of will on every single one of those, and 1 for free, and they all went off, which was great. So now we've got Fortify Spirit up on 3 of our big heroes. I debated putting one on Denethor as well, because he's my army leader, and like 3 black darts getting thrown at him in a single turn could be catastrophic. But I decided instead Denethor was just going to be hiding all game. He was going to do a good job hiding and running away. Hopefully that would work out for me. So, meanwhile, while Gandalf is fortifying spirits for days, my rangers unleash hell, and I manage to get 8 shooting casualties before the battle lines close. So my opponent has gone from outnumbering me to not outnumbering anymore. And we get into the first big turn. It's turn 4. I take priority. Josh has been rushing forwards. And I decide that what I'm going to do... Oh, no, I'm sorry, it's turn 3. It's turn 3.
Got any pictures?
Yeah, this is... so it's just moved on. I guess it's a beat behind for you.
Okay.
Josh takes priority. He moves forwards, and he's got Burda in the front of his battle lines, which makes sense because you're not really afraid of him getting shot. And he can't... he's got a big base. He's easy to trap. He's easy to get stuck, so you want him in the front. I don't think he was thinking about Gandalf having command, because Burda's only got 1 will. So Gandalf spends 2 of his remaining 3 will to command Burda, and I rolled a 4 high. And after a brief thought, I was like, this is my power move here. I need to get his big combat threat off the board. I spent 2 of Gandalf's might to push it into a 6. Burda does not resist it. He rolled a 3 and decided not to spend all 3 of Burda's might. So I pull Burda 3 inches forwards and then charge him with all 3 of my Rohan heroes. Oh no, I'm sorry. I just charge him with 2 because Durnhelm is going on a suicide mission. She charges into the Tainted because I wanted to try and... Once Burda's off the table, the only might left is on the Witch King and the Tainted. So if I can also pull the Tainted's might off, then it's just on the Witch King and he's the only might left on the board. And with Burda command transfixed... I was confident that the Éomer and Theodred were going to kill him in a single turn because I think I put a Warrior of Rohan, a Warrior of Minas Tirith behind him to get the trap, and then also just piled in. Once I had the guy getting the 3rd point of the trap, I then moved other guys in I didn't want to take that courage test. I didn't want to fail it, not with Harbinger around. So in the combat phase, we both strike up, and we kill Burda this turn. Which was... no, I just struck up with 1. I didn't strike up with both of them. Éomer spends a point of might and strikes. And fighting the Tainted, Durnhelm manages to win the fight and pull 2 fate off of him and a point of might. I think I got the 6, and he spent a point of might to make it a tied fight. And the fight went to me, so we pulled 2 fate, 1 might, and 1 will from being in combat off of the Tainted. That's pretty great. I take turn 4 priority, and the Tainted spends his last point of might to call a move, which I countercall with Durnhelm. The move goes to the Tainted. And no, the move goes to me. The move did go to me. I re-engage with, because my Rohan heroes got the charge. So Durnhelm goes back into the Tainted. Eomer and Theodred go back into the main battle lines of the Angmar host. This is a bit of a confusing game for me to take notes on because he was casting spells and I was casting spells. There was just so much going on in such a tight space. On his turn, no, that's next turn. Tell a lie, that's next turn. The Tainted tries to transfix. Tainted tries to transfix someone. Doesn't. I resist that. He was spending like 3 will for these. I'm sorry, the Dwimmerlake. Dwimmerlake spends 4 will to try and transfix one of my heroes. Fortify Spirit and 1 will. Resisted. It was just so great to be like, Eomer's got 3 will and Fortify Spirit. Theodred's got 3 will and Fortify Spirit. They're just untouchable. It was so satisfying. In the combat phase, Eowyn this time she was a little far forwards of my battle line. She was out on a flank. My intention was that she was going to get killed so that Eomer would get the +1 to wound. In the combat phase, she actually gets killed this turn. I would have liked for it to last a couple more turns, but it's okay. The Tainted's out of might, which was the other goal of her going in there. So Durnhelm dies this turn. Burda is dead. The Tainted's out of might, and we get into the next turn. Our battle lines have at this point locked, and the Shade has been throwing 1 will every single turn to do its Shade effect, which puts me at -1 on every single one of my duel rolls, which was what kept Josh in this game, I think, because I've got the high fight, and the fact that my heroes could potentially, like, if he rolled a 6 and I'm fighting regular guys with his orcs, my heroes need to roll a 6 and then spend a point of might to win that fight.
Yeah.
So it was what's keeping him in the game, and that combined with the Dwimmerlake's special power, I was not familiar at all with the Dwimmerlake. I don't know if you are, Sam.
He, like, you spend the point of will, and it, like, has a... It's like, if you spend might, you spend extra or something.
Yeah, so if he's within 6 inches of a hero, anytime that hero spends any resource, I'm not sure if it's fate, it's definitely will and might. The Dwimmerlake can spend a point of will and roll a dice. And on a 4 or better, I have to spend a second one of those resources to make the first one go off.
Yes.
Which is very interesting. It meant that I was much more cagey with do I spend my might or not with him sitting there. He's sitting in the woods in the back of this picture. You can see he's in the woods. So in Josh's turn, he takes one of the, believe it was the Tainted, who compels my banner bearer backwards away from my battle line, so that he's not in base contact with anybody. And then the Witch King black darts my banner bearer. Spends 3 will on the black dart, and gets the 1 to wound, and spends 2 might to get the wound. And has killed my banner, which actually, because he has a banner, now puts him ahead on victory points this game. It was a really, really good play. I could have prevented it pretty easily by having 2 guys behind my banner so that he couldn't have been compelled. But hey, you live and you learn. In the combat phase, I have pushed forwards, and unfortunately, the board is pretty congested. There's a lot of woods around. I'm not moving my infantry into the woods. The orcs are sort of skirting the woods, and I don't want to put Eomer and Theodred into the woods for obvious reasons. They want their cavalry charge bonus. And I actually trapped Eomer with Theodred at this turn. And this is one of those turns where the Shades rule came in clutch. So Eomer is fighting against, like, I don't know, 3 orcs with spear supports, and they've got two-handed orc weapons. And the orcs get the 6. And I think Eomer rolled a 4 high, which takes him down to a 3 with the Shade, and he's got 2 points of might left. So he lost the fight and was flash killed this turn. Not flash, he'd already spent might, but he was killed this turn by just orcs with 2-handed axes.
Nice.
Which was because I'd trapped him with Theodred, which was really unfortunate. But it did mean that in the next turn, Theodred can charge into... Eomer was leading in front of Theodred. Theodred can charge into that hole, and who is in that hole, Sam, is none other than the Witch King. So Theodred spends the rest of the game just smashing into the Witch King. It was fantastic. There was just nothing Josh could do. Theodred was on fire. He would get the 6, and he'd be fighting against the Witch King and some orcs, and they would get like a 5 high, and the shade would go off, so my fight would go down to a 5, and we'd get the tie, and the roll-off would go to me. And Theodred did a pretty great job. He pulled all of the Witch King's fate off over 3 turns. And Alish is coming around and letting us know that the time's grinding down, And I forgot that Gandalf had Banish. He spent all of his will at this point. We're late in the game. And if you look at this picture, this is a few turns further on. Going the wrong way. That whole right-hand flank has just been completely rolled. Those are all of those white bases up in there. Are those Gileath bases from my force? Josh's Angmar army is on snow bases, so it's a little bit difficult to tell. But I didn't even have any heroes on that flank. That's where his orc archers were. So my army's fighting against defense 4 orcs. It was great. And I guess defense 5, defense 4 doesn't really matter when you're strength 3. Either way, just rolled through that flank. They were outside of range of the shade. I even managed to start charging warriors into the Dwemer Lake and pulling Will off of him because he's in combat now every single turn, which means he's not doing magic. So we're getting into the last couple of turns of the game, and then I was like, oh my god, Gandalf has Banish. So I'd start throwing 1 dice banishes at the Witch King, which is just fantastic. The first one that goes off, I get it on a 5. Witch King manages to resist it. And then, Theodred's hitting him. I can't remember if the banishes were pulling if Theodred got all of his fate or some of it was the banish. But we get into the last turn of the game. It's going to go to time, and the Witch King has to retreat behind these. Like, Josh runs away. You can see these woods back there. Theodred in this picture is fighting the Witch King. Josh takes last turn priority, and the Witch King runs to go hide behind those trees. Gandalf comes riding around the flank. I have thinned his army out enough that there's space for Gandalf to move, and he just gets the maneuver in, and he can just see the Witch King. And I get the banish off. Get it on another 5. 3rd banish in a row. Getting on a 5, just 1 dice. And the Witch King has the Crown of Morgul. He's down at this point, because he's been fighting Theodred every single turn, and he's spent a lot of will on a couple of black darts. He's down to 1 fate.
You mean 1 will?
Sorry, down to 1 will. So if he... shoot. No, he was down to 1 will, so he needed to resist the spell on a 6, right? Because then he gets that will back. And he resisted it on a 5. Took the reroll on the crown, rerolled it into another 5. So he finally did resist one of my banishes. Didn't matter though, because that took him out of fate, out of will. Witch King evaporates at the end of this turn, and the game goes to me with a 3-2 victory. 3 victory points for killing my opponent's leader, or 2 victory points and broken. And he had a banner, and I did not, because I foolishly let my banner get killed and didn't manage to kill his. At one point, I thought that there was no one in base contact with his banner, so I was going to Sorcerous Blast it into the Witch King. But turns out that he had just accidentally knocked his models or something. So I didn't have that opportunity. I didn't mention the Barrow-wight at all this game because it spent all of its will in 2 paralyzers, which I resisted with Fortified Spirit. So Barrow-wight did nothing except be a shade to make the orcs terrifying. A really great game, super fun. Definitely enjoyed just seeing Angmar and laughing at their ineffective magic for once.
Yeah, I mean, it's neat Angmar list, but definitely doesn't seem like a particularly competitive one.
No, I think it had done really well for him because people weren't really quite sure what to do with the Dwemer Lake, and I think he'd done a really good job of pulling people's resources off with the Dwemer Lake in his other games.
Yeah.
And the fact that you've got 3 wraiths potentially throwing black darts and spell can be very, very powerful. Burda's definitely not the S tier choice. Obviously, Gullivar is the way to go.
Yeah.
But even then, I'd have pincushioned the crap out of Gullivar in this game.
Yeah. Interesting. Wow. Excellent. So Ben, you have to tell us how it all ended up.
Yeah. So the final rankings were Sam, obviously not you, not here, took 1st place. We'll call him Other Sam because I can't remember his last name. Other Sam took 1st place. Yours truly took 2nd place. I know. And my opponent from round 3 took 3rd place.
Oh wow!
And I did that backwards. But Alisher, of course, read 3rd place first, then 2nd place, then 3rd place. So when he read that my opponent who I'd beaten had gotten third place. I was like, oh, that must mean that he had 2 major victories or something, and I didn't podium or whatever. So I was like, oh, whatever. And then he read, and Ben Gallagher, second place. Like, oh my God, super surprise.
Awesome.
So yeah, absolutely great tournament. A very fun army list to play with, although it has no theme.
I assume that Sam's first place army was the Last Alliance, because if it's the Dudum.
Yeah, I think it was the Last Alliance.
Or it was some combination of elves and men.
Yeah. The top table final battle was had the bird bath, which is Gwaihir and Galadriel with the mirror flying the mirror around. And they were playing on the table that I played in round 1. And I don't know if you saw, those buildings had like flat tops. And I know for a fact the mirror got picked up and put on top of one of those buildings at one point for whatever reason.
It really, it really just makes me not want to go to any more events. I'm getting very tired of all this shit that people are doing. But whatever, they'll rue the day that they make me start running events.
Oh, maybe not. Maybe not. We'll have some pirate themed events.
Yeah, well, I mean, some people will be happy, but anyone who wants to do that stuff, I'll be like, nope. It's all right. I will rule with an iron fist, as is my right to do. No, excellent. So a fun sounds like a fun event. Some cool practice for Nova. Sort of interesting thinking about. For me, hearing about this event in some more detail and some of the lists you played against, and with army choices I'm considering, like, how I feel like I would do against those, and what the rest of the field was like.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's hard to say, right? Because Nova's going to be 100 people or whatever, and this was, I don't know, 12 people or something like that. But it did seem to me that people were definitely leaning towards taking slightly odd things rather than going like super power. But like you said, the Angmar list doesn't seem like the super optimized. Sure. But it's still good enough that it was doing, because it's Angmar, it's good, right? It was still good enough that he was fighting me on the second table in the final round. But willing to take something a little bit different.
Yeah.
So I was also surprised that I think the biggest army was the Angmar player with like 56 models. Which was nice. I was really, really thrilled not to see 70-something figures across the table.
Yeah. No, it will be interesting. So as we start wrapping up this episode, by the time this one releases, you will have already been to this event. But I believe this coming weekend you've got another 1,000-point event. So perhaps to give us a little preview, I think the plan is to play the same thing, essentially.
It's essentially the same thing. I decided to take the throwing spears off the Rohan heroes and drop in a couple of Fountain Court. Sure. The thing that I got consistent, I didn't mention it in that battle report, I got consistently lucky with my courage tests against just like charging into the orc lines. There were a couple of turns where I failed like 4 and was like, okay, this is not, like I had a plan and 4 of my guys are sitting there like quaking in their boots. But for the most part, I got pretty lucky, and I think just having like even 4 bodyguard troops would have just like really wouldn't have had to rely on luck there. I could have just left them on a flank and they would have been great.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is with the Gondor army bonus, right? On average, you'll pass the courage test, so it's not. Yeah, and that is with the Harbinger of Evil. So when you don't have Harbinger of Evil, it's even more likely. But yeah, no, for sure. I mean, they're definitely some more defense 7. Fountain Court is certainly good. Yeah. Well, interesting. Is there anything else you would like to add before we close up this episode?
No, I don't think so.
All right. Well, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And come back in 2 short weeks when we have another episode. Thank you for listening to Gondor Calls for Ale. We hope you have enjoyed this episode. We, at Gondor Calls for Ale, are officially sponsored by the Baron of Dice, the producer of premium wargaming dice. These beautifully hand-swirled resin dice have no micro bubbles and are therefore perfectly balanced. With over 3,000 variants and unique designs, nearly every tabletop gaming system is represented. So check out the description of this episode for a link and a discount code. Go buy yourself some new dice and let the good times roll. We at Gondor Calls for Ale are not associated with Games Workshop, New Line Cinema, or the Tolkien Estate. We hope we have not misrepresented or offended anyone. These recordings are strictly recollections of games we've played and are not commentaries on the character or competence of our opponents. They are intended purely for entertainment, and we hope they will be taken as such. You can find us on Patreon, see the link in the description. Supporting Gondor Calls for Ale there helps us continue to produce these episodes. You can find us on Instagram at Gondor_calls_for_ale. Feel free to send us a message there. Or on Facebook as Gondor Calls for Ale, another great place to send us a message. Or you can send us an email at gondorcallsforale@gmail.com. As Boromir, Captain of the White Tower, once said, remember today, listener, today this episode was good.